Oh my god, John, you know that new podcast, Serial? I am obsessed with it.
Oh my god, I love that podcast so much. That is all I can talk about with any of my friends right now. Do you know there's a subreddit where people post like theories they have about what's going on in the podcast? It's incredible.
Oh my god, I love that subreddit. I've read every single post on it. In fact, I've even started reading this other subreddit, which is about the subreddit. So on the other subreddit about the subreddit, they kind of post theories about like what's going on the subreddit. It's so good.
If you love that subreddit, you will absolutely love this Slate podcast that they just put out. Basically, they wait until the Serial podcast comes out, and then they make their own podcast where they talk about the Serial podcast.
Dude, don't tell me about that Slate podcast. I love that Slate podcast. I've listened to every episode. In fact, I've even started listening to a podcast that's about the Slate podcast. So every week when the Slate podcast comes out, this podcast also comes out and talks about what they're talking about on the Slate podcast.
Oh yeah, like how in the original podcast, Sarah and Dana recreate the route that was taken on the day of the murder. Well, in the Slate podcast, they recreate Sarah and Dana recreating the route.
Oh my god, that episode was so good. On the podcast about the podcast about the podcast, they also tried to recreate the Slate guys recreating Dana and Sarah recreating the route that they took on the day of the murder, but they just got lost. Oh, I don't know if you've seen, but the host of the show, Sarah Koenig, has been doing all these interviews where she talks about what it's like to host the show. They're so interesting.
Listen to me. I've read every single one of those interviews. Do you understand me? In fact, I've read so many, they're not enough. I've started reading interviews with another woman who just happens to be named Sarah Koenig, where she talks about the interviews with real Sarah Koenig, and also just what it's like to be named Sarah Koenig.
Oh, does she like being named Sarah Koenig?
She does. Oh my god, I'm obsessed with this conversation. I mean, the one we're having, and you should totally check out this conversation just over here where they're presenting theories about what they think we're talking about.
Oh my god, yeah, I'm obsessed with that conversation.
So here's a theory I have, and it might not make any sense at all, but I think that Sal and John are talking about how much they love the podcast Serial.
Oh my god, I